In Lesson 62, we'll be solving fractional part word problems. In each of these cases, it might appear at first that we have two unknowns, but if we read further into the problem, we'll be given some information so that we are able to fill something in and only have one unknown. Pay close attention for keywords like of, is, had, have, things that we know we can associate with a symbol. In this first example we have 5/8 of the gnomes who lived in the magic forest had happy faces. If 840 gnomes had happy faces, how many gnomes lived in the magic forest? The first thing that I see is the words 5/8. I can rewrite that as a fraction. If I continue on, I see the word of, and I know that of means multiplication, so I'm going to write down a multiplication sign. I'm going to use a dot so that if I use an x for my variable, I'm not confused between what is the multiplication sign and what is the variable. So it says, 5/8 of the gnomes who lived in the magic forest had happy faces. So it's 5/8 of a total number. I'm going to let x represent the gnomes in the entire forest, not just the ones with happy faces. It says, if 840 gnomes had happy faces, how many lived in the magic forest? Well, if I go back to that first sentence, it says 5/8 of the gnomes, and that means the total gnomes, had happy faces. That word had is the same as having an equal sign. And we're going to say these are the happy face people, and we're just going to write HF for happy faces. But we can see in this second sentence, 840 of them had happy faces. So let's replace that HF instead with 840. Now it's time to solve the problem. Since 5/8 is multiplied times x, I would typically divide, but I can't divide fractions, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, 8/5. When I do that, everything on the left-hand side cancels out, leaving just the x. On the right-hand side, I'm going to think of 840 as 840 over 1, and I'm going to look for anything that might simplify. 5 will go into 5 one time, and 5 will go into 840 168 times. Then I will multiply 168 times 8, and I get 1,344. We make sure and put our label back on there. This number represents all the gnomes that lived in the forest, so we'll write gnomes next to it. Our second example is worded a little bit differently, so let's go through this. On Monday, 2 4/5 times the acceptable number of rock badgers took refuge in the mountain caves. If 640 was the acceptable number, how many rock badgers took refuge in the mountain caves on Monday? Well, we're given some key information. We know 2 4/5 times the acceptable number took refuge. And we know that 640 was the acceptable number. So the key word here is times, which means we're going to multiply. If we do 2 4/5 times 640, we'll know how many rock badgers took refuge. In order to multiply this, I need to change this mixed number into an improper fraction. So 2 4/5 is going to become 14/5. And then I can go ahead and do my multiplication. I do look for things that could possibly cancel, and I'll see that 5 could go into 640. 5 will go into 640 128 times. Then I can multiply 14 times 128, and I find out that 1,792 rock badgers took refuge in the mountains. Example 3 gives us another scenario that you might encounter. When the fog lifted, 400 ghosts were spied skulking near the outskirts. If 240 ghosts were not spied, what fraction of the ghost was not spied? So we have two different things going on here. There were 400 that were spied and 240 that were not spied. And we want to know the fraction of the total ghost that was not spied? Well, we're going to have to total these things up first. There were 400 and 240, and if I put that together, I know that the total amount of ghost was 640. So if I want to know the fraction that was not spied, I would look at that number, 240, over the total, which is 640, and then I would reduce it. I can cancel out the zeros, so I'm just going to look at 24 and 64. I need to think of a number that will go into both of those. 8. 8 will go into 24 3 times, and 8 will go into 64 8 times. So 3/8 of the total ghost were not spied. Now it's time for you to try a practice problem. Take a moment, read the problem, pause the video, try it by yourself, and then turn the video back on to see how you did. In this practice problem, you might have noticed that it's very similar to example 1. When the gun sounded, only 2/5 of the racers began to run. If 460 racers began to run, how many racers were there in all? In this particular case, they made 2 references to the racers that began to run. It says only 2/5 of the racers began to run. This sentence is referring to 2/5 of the total racers. The second sentence tells us that 460 racers began to run. So now we know an exact number. To set this problem up, you should have written 2/5 of, which would be multiplication, x, because I don't know how many total races there were, was equal to 460. To solve it, you need to multiply by the reciprocal, 5/2. You can cancel out everything on the left, leaving just the x, and this 2 will cancel with the 460, leaving 230. Then you can multiply 230 times 5, and you'll find out that there was 1,150 racers in all.